Let's see. Do I look good? Do I look good? I always look good. Not always. Sometimes. Do I look good enough to get laid? Oh, odds don't look good. Okay, let's sink this. Okay, let's talk about enemies. It's an important topic, actually. There are two things that you have to know, first of all, about enemies. Number one, never be afraid to make enemies. Never. And number two, pick the right enemies and for the right reasons. Now, a lot of guys, they confuse competitors with enemies. They think that competitors are the same thing, but no, a competitor is just a guy who wants the same thing that you want. I don't know, you want to, fuck some girl, right? You want to fuck Jane Doe, and this other guy, Mr. X, he also wants to fuck Jane Doe. Yeah, he's a competitor. He's a competitor for Jane Doe's pussy. Does that make him an enemy? No. Okay, because a competitor is just somebody who wants the same thing as you do. An enemy is very different. An enemy wants you gone. Okay, an enemy hates you. Doesn't matter why they hate you. They hate you, and they want ill for you. Why do they want ill? Because they basically want one of two outcomes: for you to either remove yourself from their environment, or else they want you totally annihilated from the environment. For an enemy, an annihilation of you would be good, but he'll take you leaving as the default outcome. You see what I'm saying? Which is different from a competitor. And I want to make this distinction very clear because stupid men confuse the two. Stupid men, foolish men, confuse a competitor with an enemy. A competitor, normally, and in a healthy way, should have no emotion about you. He doesn't care about you one way or the other. And many times, it's happened to me, that a competitor, we wind up being friendly with one another. Yeah, sure. With a competitor, lots of times I've gone out to have a drink with a competitor and shoot the shit. And often as not, a competitor and you will have a lot of things in common because you're faced with the same problems, because you want the same objectives. And believe it or not, you'll find in different times of your life that it pays you to be friendly with your competitor. Right, not make an enemy out of your competitor, but just acknowledge that he's a competitor, he wants the same thing that you do, and you can be friendly. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be friends, because so long as you both share the same objective, you can never be friends with a competitor, okay? But you also have to recognize when you're competing and when you're not. To give an example here on YouTube, for instance, there are a whole bunch of other YouTubers who do videos much like mine, right? Are they my competitors? Well, not really, because see, we're competing, quote unquote, for the same audience, but see, the audience, they can subscribe to both our channels and watch both our content. So it's not that we want the same thing, we want the same objective, but it's not the same specific thing that we want. So sure, we can be friendly and we can be very good friends. In fact, I have made, fortunate enough for me, a number of very good friends on YouTube because we recognize that though we are competing, it's not the exact same thing that we want. We want the attention of the same people, but that attention is not a finite resource. It could be spread out over 2 or 3 or several YouTubers, okay? Obviously. I mean, this doesn't need any kind of elaboration to be understood, right? Right. But a competitor that wants the same thing you do. I mean, for instance, like Jane Doe's pussy, right? Both of you want the same pussy, or both of you want the same business deal, or the same position in your corporate climb, or whatever the hell, right? Now, you can be friendly with that guy. And in point of fact, it's smarter to be friendly with him than to make him your enemy, that you hate him, okay? Why? Because, first of all, if you're friendly with somebody, you're going to act more rationally and not make so many mistakes that come out of emotion, which is what happens with enemies, and I'll get to that in just a moment. You see, when you're friendly with a competitor, you can share a lot of information that is necessary for both of you, and a lot of times, by the act of being friendly, you can get to a position with a competitor where you both sort of like, cede ground and potentially help each other, okay? A competitor is not necessarily an enemy, is the point I'm trying to make here. Because yeah, in the case of like, Jane Doe's pussy, you both want that pussy and you don't want anybody else having that pussy, right? Yeah. But in like business, lots of times you and a competitor might both want the same business deal or whatever, but it turns out that, you can both get it. And in point of fact, sometimes if you work together, you'll both get a better deal than if you'd work separately. You see what I'm trying to say? That's why in the United States and in most industrialized countries, anti-monopolistic laws, anti-collusion laws are so strictly enforced, because a lot of times in business especially, it turns out that a competitor can potentially be an ally, where you can help each other out and everybody makes out better than if they'd just been at loggerheads. You see what I mean? So competitors are different from enemies, okay? Okay, now enemies. Enemies, it doesn't matter why you made an enemy of somebody, okay? That does not matter, but the point of an enemy is that you hate him and he hates you, presumably, okay? You hate him, he hates you, and you want each other's ill, You want them to suffer and die. The ideal outcome is for you want the enemy to just disappear from the scene, right? Okay. Now, a lot of people are terrified of making an enemy, and they go out of their way not to make enemies. Why are they so afraid of making an enemy? Well, it's simplicity itself. See, they think that maybe this person that could potentially be an enemy could be useful to them in the future. And so they don't want to burn that bridge. The other possibility is, of course, that they are afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of confrontation, and therefore, instead of just, clashing openly with somebody, they sort of like try to finesse the situation. They're even willing to take a subservient position to their opponent, the person that they potentially could become an enemy of, in order to not have an enemy, because they're terrified of it. They think that having an enemy is like a bad thing, okay? Now, I'm here to tell you that an enemy is potentially a very good thing, and you should never be afraid of making an enemy, okay? You should never be afraid of making an enemy, because a lot of times an enemy will help you figure out what you're about. Crazy as that may sound. Let me explain. You see, it goes to the issue of picking the right enemy and for the right reason. See, most of the time, the enemies you make, they will be based on moral grounds. It's not necessarily that you don't like them as a person. It's that there's something about them morally that you object to. The way they behave, the way that they act, you just do not like that. And you will find many times when you have an animosity towards somebody, or that turns into enmity, it'll be that there is something about them on a moral level, on the level of principle, that you despise, okay? Because it won't usually be an issue of liking them or not. You'll find that just liking somebody or not liking them is really not enough to make of them an enemy. I mean, there are lots of people that I don't particularly care for. I mean, like on YouTube, for instance, there are lots of my fellow content creators whom I don't really like. I kind of just don't like them. I think that they're this, that, the other. It doesn't matter. It's being gay for whatever reason. But the point is, there are lots of them that I don't like, but I don't make enemies out of them. Okay? Because you make enemies because of their moral stance, of what they consider good and what they consider wrong, evil, okay? That's why you make an enemy. When you make an enemy, you are making a moral distinction. They do that which I object to, and I do not do that. Or conversely, I do something which is good, and they refrain from doing that. See what I mean? Yeah, that can make an enemy, you see, because it's not merely that you dislike them. It's that their moral outlook is at loggerheads with your own. This is very different, because you can have competing interests with a competitor, but morally you're on the same page. That's why so many times competitors wind up being friends, or at least friendly, because they view the world in a very similar way, and they want basically the same things, not only in their own lives, but in the world around them, in the society around them. And that's why so many people who are competitors, who are at loggerheads over a specific issue, they come together on the bigger issues, on the things that truly matter. And that's why they can be friendly. You see what I mean? But enemies, it's a moral issue. And never forget that. See? Because since it is a moral issue, who you become enemies with is a moral stance that you are taking, and you should take it. And you should take it with confidence. And I'll give you a specific example. In my own case, late last year, in December of 2017, there was a whole situation with this asshole, Kraut & T. He was running a doxing and smearing server, and he deliberately went and collected as much personal information about me in order to smear me. Now, of course, this behavior was just despicable. He excused it to himself and to others, claiming that I was this very bad man. And here we are a year later, and we realize it was all just bullshit, right? Now, the key issue is that, see, Sargon of Akkad knew of this investigation, quote unquote, which is just to dox and smear somebody, me, and intimidate me off of the internet. And here we are a year later, and clearly it didn't work. Now, Sargon knew about it, okay? I didn't realize it at the time until all of a sudden a series of little pieces came together, and I realized this fucker knows. This fucker, Sargon of Akkad, knows that Kraut & T is doing this dox and smear campaign, and he's not putting a stop to it. And he could have, of course, because he was the leader of the group that Kraut & T belongs to still, rather. And Sargon did nothing about it. And that's when I realized Sargon's morality and mine were incompatible. Because I don't believe in doxing and smearing anybody, okay? I only believe in what you say on YouTube videos. You do a video and I'll take you on that ground. You say some shit on a stream and I'll take you at your word. But I'm not going to go, hunting for personal information about somebody in order to, say, aha, I gotcha. No, that's not how I play the game, I could give a shit who anybody else is. Sometimes I'm like mildly curious, but it's not something that I go out of my way to look for. In fact, I don't. In fact, by happenstance, I know the actual names of a number of YouTubers because people are assholes, and a lot of times they leave comments in my comment section, and so I read them, of course. And to tell you the truth, I don't give a shit who the actual name is of all of these prominent YouTubers. It's just not of any interest to me whatsoever, see? Because I don't play that game. It's not my morality. But see, it is Sargon of Akkad's morality. For all his bullshit talk about social justice warriors and how they try to deplatform people and that's bad, well, he tries to do the exact same thing. He tries to do the exact same thing because he's the same. He has a morality that is incompatible with my own. My morality is, thou shalt not dox and smear people with information that is not germane to the YouTube community. That's my motto, that's my morality. When I realized that it was not his and that he was willing to act on something that I found despicable, he became my enemy. And I didn't have a problem saying it. And when I said it, a whole bunch of people shit all over me and said I was like this, that, the other, and they called me all kinds of nasty, nasty names. Product of the smears of Kraut & T and Sargon, right? And I posted a video, said Sargon knew. It became a meme, as a matter of fact. Sargon knew. And turns out here, a year later, yeah, Sargon did know. Yeah. I was right to have picked him as an enemy. And I was right to have decided that I wasn't going to fear making of him an enemy instead of just going for it. Because a year later, who's left standing? Who's, growing bigger than ever, right? Yeah, just did a 100,000 subscriber mini movie. Susan, go check it out. I really enjoyed doing that, by the way. Anyway, yeah. My channel is in rude health, and Sargon of Akkad's credibility is completely destroyed precisely because I recognized him on a moral level. He is a man who is willing to dox and smear people and to play very, very dirty in order to get his way. That morality was incompatible with my own. And I called him out on it. And at the time, I got a ton of shit, right? A ton of shit. I lost subscribers, people called me names, blah, blah, blah. A year later, who was right? I mean, everybody is getting on the bandwagon that I started. I don't begrudge anybody, recognizing what happened. Of course not. It's just, some people realize very early what's going on, and some people, it takes a little time. It doesn't matter. The point that I'm trying to make here, and I'm not trying to humble brag, although I suppose I am kind of humble bragging, but anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that, see, if you're right, at the end of the day, everyone will know. If you make the right enemy for the right reasons, and you're not afraid of making an enemy of him, in the end, you will win. And it's going to take time, of course. This kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight. It took nearly a year for people to figure out that my enmity with Sargon was completely justified. And it is, because the guy is low. The guy is low. He's a snake. He is more than happy to try to deplatform people that he disagrees with. He didn't do it before because he was in a stronger position. But once his position becomes weak, as it has become, because his views are down, his subscriber count is plateauing, his channels are dying. We all know that. And he doesn't know where to go or what to do. Well, when he's in a position like that, then he starts showing his true colors. And his true colors, what are they? SJW colors. That's what. They're rainbow colors. They're the colors of, a low human being. But look, this video isn't about that fucker, okay? That's not the issue at all that I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say here in this video is understand. See, if you're in the right, don't be afraid of making an enemy, but know at every step of the way why you are making an enemy. Understand the reasons for it, okay? And finally, making the right enemy. The right one, picking the right one. Okay. Pick the biggest one. Don't pick little. Don't go for chump change. Go for the biggest enemy in your environment. Now, of course, don't make a move on the biggest enemy when you're in a position of weakness, okay? Don't let it be known that you consider, the top dog to be your enemy. Remember, enemy as opposed to competitor, those are two different categories. If you simply see the top dog and you want to be the top dog in your environment and you want to take his place, well, it's nothing personal. You just are an ambitious little shit and want to get to the top. Well, good on you. That's life. That's competition. That's the way of nature. It's survival of the fittest. It's Darwinian, baby. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that's fine. Okay? And if you have the goal of getting to the top, more power to you if you just say it and go for it and do it, okay? I'm not talking about competition. I'm talking enmity, being an enemy of somebody, seeing somebody as an enemy that you don't merely want to best, but you want him obliterated from the scene. Because remember, as I said before, that's the only possible outcome with an enemy. To either have him gone from the scene altogether, or to have him completely obliterated. That's what you want to do with an enemy. You want him gone from your environment. Gone, and so long, and thanks for all the fish, motherfucker. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. That's what you want to do with an enemy. You want him off the field of battle, gone. Doesn't matter where, or destroyed, because destroyed and gone are the same thing now, aren't they? They're not in your environment anymore. They can't cause any problems anymore, right? Right. So with an enemy, you want him gone. Now, how you go about doing this, okay? Here's something that I've found from experience, okay? I did a video a few days ago called The Best Revenge is Living Well. You can find it right here. It's very true. See, a lot of times with an enemy, you don't have to do anything. A lot of times with an enemy, especially if you provoke the guy enough, he'll start reacting to you and he'll start making mistakes. He'll start making mistakes that he will not be able to recover from. It's sort of like, when you see somebody walking and they trip, and they trip forward and they start trying to recover. And as they try to recover, they start going faster and faster and faster forward. They're falling forward faster than when they were walking as they try to recover. And their legs are going under them, right? Trying to keep up, stand up, not fall face first. And in their effort and moving their feet so hard that they don't fall, they actually wind up falling harder than otherwise. Now, that's what happens a lot of times, especially with people who are low, who are doing things that are low, that are objectively low. And don't give me this shit that morality is relative. It's not. It's objective. Okay? In the case of this individual, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, he is a low human being. He's just a low scumbag. And he has shown himself to be a scumbag. He's a hypocrite who used to argue that the leftists were deplatforming people and they were bad. And what does he do? Well, he tries to do the exact same thing now that his position on YouTube is weak. Okay? So that objectively shows you that the man is a hypocrite. He's a scumbag and a coward and a fuckstick. And this is the beauty of life. Usually such men get their comeuppance, and you don't have to do much to make that happen. It happens all on its own. Usually after the first couple of trip-ups, they start trying to scramble to get themselves back up. And in that scramble, it gets worse and worse. They gain more and more speed. And they just tumble head over heels, okay? Now, I have to emphasize this one point. Do not be afraid of making an enemy. Don't. I'm not saying go out there and get into fights with everybody and pick fights with everybody. No, that's fucking stupid, okay? No. What I'm saying is that, when you've been in an environment long enough, you understand the environment, you understand the players of it, you understand, the different roles that people play, because everybody has a role. Okay, never forget that. Everybody has a role. Some people are your competitors, some of them are your colleagues, some of them are people who are trying to rise up and want your position, and they don't mean anything bad to you personally. They are indifferent to you personally. They just want what you currently have, and that's competition, right? And you yourself will want to climb up and get what somebody else higher up has, right? Yeah, it's natural, it's normal, okay? That's not the issue. Once you have seen everybody and understand everybody's role, you will inevitably find that person who has that morality that clashes with your own, okay? Now, the first thing you have to do there, when you realize this, is that you have to ask yourself, do I have to confront this man? Do I have to make an enemy of him? See, because I say autism is a choice, and it is, but so is making enemies, okay? Sometimes somebody's morality and their outlook conflicts with yours, contrasts with yours, clashes with yours. But that is not enough of a reason to make of them an enemy, okay? That's a hard lesson I've had to learn. A hard lesson I've had to learn because in a lot of environments over the years, especially when I was much younger, I almost went out of my way to make enemies, okay? Because my moral sensibilities are such that sometimes I found it intolerable to be in the same environment with somebody whose morality, whose sense of what was good and right and appropriate conflicted with my own. And when I was younger, I was just very, very idealistic. I was, quite frankly, sort of like a white knight on that score. Not insofar as women are concerned, but insofar as being the white knight. I'm going to be the paladin. I'm going to be riding my white horse with my white armor and my silver sword, and I'm going to cut down those people who are acting in ways that I consider immoral. Okay? That's the attitude I used to have. It's an attitude of an adolescent, of a child. And unfortunately, I had that attitude for not just my adolescence, but into my 20s and my 30s. I was very, very pathetic, as opposed to being much more pragmatic as I am now. When I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I would needlessly make enemies based on moral issues that did not really affect the situation. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, and that's just adolescent behavior. So don't be like that. Don't learn from my mistakes, okay? I did that. I made a lot of enemies that I shouldn't have, or more to the point, I needn't have. But I did it because I was idealistic. I was a white knight on a moral level, not with the women. I've never been a white knight insofar as women are concerned. But anyway, the point I want to make here in this conversation is when you see somebody who could potentially be an enemy, figure out if there is a need to make of them an enemy. Okay? A lot of times you'll find that you'll want to make enemies with somebody for your own sense of self-aggrandizement, because you'll want to show up, I'm bigger than you, and I hate you, and your morality and your moral outlook on the environment, the situation is intolerable to me, but you're just doing it for ego gratification, for validation. Okay, don't do that. Okay, because that's basically what I was doing. All right, don't do that. Look at somebody who could potentially be your enemy and figure out, must I make them an enemy? And you know what the answer is? The simple way to figure it out is to see if they're competing for the same thing you are. See? And this is how this all circles back to the issue of competition. You see, a competitor is not necessarily an enemy of yours. Okay? A competitor is simply another guy in your environment who wants the same thing you want, right? But an enemy, or let me rephrase that, a guy that you decide to make an enemy of yours, is somebody who has a moral outlook that you seriously object to, number one. And number two, is fundamentally a competitor. Now, usually this tends to happen with strong personalities that want to be the king shit of Turd Mountain, right? Who want to be the big guy in a given environment. Okay, there are people, and perhaps you're one of them, who in his environment needs to be the big dog, right? And he sees the current big dog and wants to shove him aside. That happens all the time. Because the fact of the matter is, you can't have two alpha dogs in the same kennel. It doesn't work, okay? At the end of the day, for the top slot, there's only room for one. Okay? In any given environment, no matter how mundane or small or grand, at the end of the day, there can only be one man. Because that's the way of nature. That's the way we have evolved. We have evolved to be competitors. We have evolved to compete, and once we get to a slot that satisfies us, we're content there. And we, elbow the others aside who are trying to come up, right? And we're happy there in our slot. But there are a few guys who just need to get to the top, who need to be the big dog. And those guys will become enemies. They can never be friends. Nope, no matter what. And by hook or by crook, they're going to fuck each other over and they're going to become enemies. Okay? And that happens, and that's the way of the world. Okay? So, insofar as the top slot, right? There's only room for one. And the guys competing for the top slot will always be enemies. Even though they're competing, as I said before, that competitors need not be enemies, but in the case of being the top dog in any given environment, they will always be enemies. Because what happens is that on a moral level, both of them espouse a different moral philosophy, and they will seek to impose it on their entire environment. And that will mean shoving aside the guy who's at the top and imposing it themselves. That is the way of human beings. And what happens is that everybody below that top guy follows their morality, follows their outlook, follows what they are doing. Yeah. That's how it is. There's a saying, the fish rots from the head, when the leadership is corrupt or bad. Everything going down starts to rot as well. The whole pyramid of status starts to copy, mimic the morality that's being espoused from the top. Because that's the way human beings are. Now in this video, I've kind of like lost a little bit of track of where I was going in this whole conversation, but I think I've nailed the major points, right? The final point, see, when you see other men who are enemies, get out of their way, okay? Because there's no use of you being in the way. And most of the time, most sensible, rational men, if they are enemies, they won't begrudge you being friendly or even friends with both sides. Friendly, yes. Friends, then it gets trickier, okay? But don't get in the way. Just give them a wide berth, okay? Just as you see two dogs that are fighting in the street, what, you get in the way? No, you fucking get out of the way. You avoid them, you go around them. Yeah, you see two men who are enemies, don't get in the way. There's no reason for you to. Now, when you see two top dogs, two dominant men who are fighting out for the top slot of the whole environment, you're going to have to choose which of the two to follow, which of the two you want to be associated with. Because that's the reality of it, okay? When you're in an environment and you see that big man who's on top being successfully challenged by a newcomer who's got the balls and the gumption and the stick-with-itness to make a credible threat to the top dog, well, you're going to have to figure out which side you're on. And in that case, this is my suggestion, and this has stood me well over the years in regard to this particular issue. Don't go with the person you think is the winning side. Ignore who you think is going to be the winning side, and focus on who you think is morally true. Who you think that on a moral level, insofar as what you consider good and evil, which of the two sides fits you better? And then follow that guy. It doesn't matter if he's the underdog in the fight. It doesn't matter if he's got no allies. If he is a credible threat to the top dog and he conforms to your sense of what is decent and good closer than the current top guy, then follow the newcomer, because you will be happier in the long run. Never go for what you perceive to be the winning side. Always make the choice based on morality, on what you consider good and what you consider wrong, and who is espousing which. It's the easy way to make the decision, and believe me, there will come times in your life when you will have to make that decision. You will have to decide who is your standard bearer. You will have to decide which side of the bright line you are on. And you have to make that decision. And don't be afraid to make that decision. If you, let me rephrase it. If you fail to make this decision or hesitate at the key moment or just try to wishy-wash your way out of it, you'll never be trusted. And in point of fact, eventually your position will be undermined and undercut by whoever winds up winning. Okay? Because nobody likes it when their support is sort of like soft-pedaled. And everybody respects somebody who goes all in on one side or the other, even if they lose. Even if you go all in on one side and that side loses, people will still respect you. But nobody respects a quisling. Nobody respects a guy who's like sort of like, No, don't be like that. Make your decision based on what you perceive and believe to be true and good and wholesome and right, and then follow that decision to the bitter end. Because the thing is, see, when you make a decision on those terms, you rarely get to the bitter end. Because what happens is that in the end, that side usually wins. In the long run, with enough patience and enough balls and enough grit, yeah, they hang around long enough to win.